Okay, that was from the Bahamas, or from earlier this hurricane season, from Hurricane Joaquin. Of course, that was from the 1937 great hurricane movie that has been on TV for a long time. Amazing video, that movie, that remake of that movie, the 1937 hurricane was truly incredible. Anyway, welcome this evening. A little bit of news, late breaking news here this evening. I was going to have Bill Phillips on the show with me. He helps me with Hurricane City. And unfortunately, he was hit by a car this evening. He is okay. I've talked to him on the phone. And he is in the hospital. He's going to be heading home soon. So naturally, when you get hit by a car, you're not in the mood to be on an internet broadcast. He was heading home from Old Dominion University, where he goes to college, and he's going to be graduating this coming up, which is very good news. And he's going to finally get out of that college. He's been studying for quite a few years there, and he's going to move on into the private sector. So we wish Bill the best of luck. But tonight, he's okay. What happened was apparently somebody was turning and hit his chair. You know, we've had talks about this before, how he should have one of those big, tall, orange flags on his wheelchair where cars can see him when they're turning, especially when it's getting dark outside. It's very concerning to me when he's out driving around up in Virginia Beach. But he's okay. He may call in a little bit later in the show, but he's going to be out of the hospital and heading home soon, so we wish him the best of luck. And I'm sorry that happened. Bill, just take it easy, and the rest of the evening, watch the show when you get home, and just chill out and lick your wounds there, buddy. I feel for you, and I wish it didn't happen, but it's one of those things that many people that are disabled have these electric chairs to drive around. Just be careful and be aware of where they are when you're driving around, and especially when you're making those right-hand turns and you can't see them when you're the driver. Anyway, the theme for this show of the end-of-season broadcast is, give me one sentence, in your opinion, that describes the Atlantic hurricane season. And my opinion is, here's my sentence: met expectations, but the U.S. was not impacted by a hurricane, which is surprising to me. So, what I mean by met its expectations, I know the original forecast from Noaa and from Dr. William Gray was for anywhere from 8 named storms. Noaa had their range up to 8 to 11 named storms, I believe. But the average for a hurricane season is 12 named storms, and we ended up with 11 this year. Actually, the average is 11.7 named storms, and we ended up with 11 this year. So it's right about what I expected. However, I'm shocked that the United States was not hit by a hurricane, because if you go back and look at a lot of the tracking maps and look at the old seasons where there's been a lack of hurricane activity, when there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 named storms, generally the Gulf of Mexico gets active. And I had 5 of my top 5 cities were in the Gulf of Mexico this year, and only one of them got hit, and that was the Central Texas coastline. Matagorda, Texas was my number 5 pick this year, and they were impacted by Tropical Storm Bill. So I wanted to thank Bill, but he's not on the show tonight. So Bill did save my ass this year, because none of my other top 5 got impacted. There were some close calls, but let's face it, Joaquin was the big story of the year. I mean, the Bahamas absolutely got annihilated. The Central Bahamas, Cat Island, Eleuthera Island, well, not Eleuthera, but Cat Island, Long Island, San Salvador Island, all were impacted heavily by Hurricane Joaquin. But I put it out there on the internet, how would you describe this hurricane season in one sentence? And I didn't get very many responses on Twitter or on the Kane Talk message board or in emails, but here's a few of people that did respond to it. Bobby Kane, of course, she's big into hurricanes and everything and loves to tweet about it and has her blog and everything. She said, her sentence was, the season that could have been with regards to the Cape Verde waves. Now, reading into this, I'm assuming that what she means is that there were enough Cape Verde waves coming across the Atlantic where had they been under a more favorable environment, we could have had a barn burner of a season, but that wind shear from the west was just chopping the tops off of all these hurricanes out there, and the deep Atlantic hurricanes really never had much of a chance. The ones that came in close to home had a better chance of development, and of course we had some systems hit the northern Leeward Islands, which did quite a bit of damage, took some lives as well, so we're going to talk on that a little bit later. I have a whole bunch of images to show you tonight. I have like 35 images I think I'm going to show you that I either used during my tropical update videos, or I just captured them for tweeting or things that I felt were interesting. So I'm going to show you a lot of images tonight. But here's another person that responded tonight. And again, tonight we're going to have a lot of people listening that were either involved in the hurricane season, or people I know in the private sector. I run a business that has nothing to do with hurricanes, and there are people that like to watch the shows, hear what I have to say. Friends, neighbors, people that tune into this tonight that may not be really in tune with all the details of the hurricane season, but one of them is Bill Sonny, I do business with, and he said, when did the season start? Which is a good point. I mean, when you think about it, if you're in the United States, you're thinking, what hurricane season? I mean, we had North Carolina get hit and Texas by tropical storms. We had Joaquin threaten the United States, or did it, or was that all just media hype? A lot of models had it coming into the U.S., but the European nailed it out to sea. And I'll get to that when we talk about Joaquin a little bit later in the show. Lori Ferguson posted on Facebook, mostly a bust for the U.S. chasers, but a good thing for South Florida and other parts of the country that have homeowners insurance and they didn't have to use it. No damage in the United States. Now, you could argue that Joaquin, the rain in the southeastern United States, all the flooding in South Carolina, partially Joaquin, I'm just not buying that. I think it was mainly the trough of low pressure, and all the low pressure areas that were forming along that front were causing all that rain, not Joaquin. Joaquin was a Bahamas system primarily, and it brushed Bermuda. But we did have two tropical storms, so there were minimal effects on the U.S. this year, but basically, a lot of people didn't have to dip into their homeowners insurance for hurricane-related reasons this hurricane season. Bill Phillips was going to join me tonight. He chimed in. A disappointment from a hurricane website and coverage perspective. Now, what I think Bill meant to say was we had big plans this year to intercept a hurricane, which goes to what Lori Ferguson was just saying. Kind of intercepting a hurricane, filming it, getting it live for the audience. That's what I want to do, is bring the hurricane live to the audience, not just from a chaser perspective. A lot of chasers like to get out there and just film the storm. I like to get out there and interview people, show the damage, the aftermath, the pre-coverage during the hurricane. And what we were planning on doing is monitoring the networks and everything going on, and then kind of figuring out where the story is. Is there a building that's coming apart? Is there a shelter that's coming apart? We're going to head there and bring you the footage live on these shows as it's happening, but that never happened this year due to, again, no hurricanes hitting the United States. 10 years now, the United States has not had a major hurricane. Florida's going on 10 years since they've had a hurricane. It's ridiculous. For people that like to track hurricanes like me and chase them, it's been a bad season. But for those of you that are just regular people that don't like hurricanes, it's been a great hurricane season, except if you live in the Bahamas and the Northern Antilles. The Windward Islands got hit kind of by Tropical Storm Erica a little bit with some flooding, but it took some lives. They had some catastrophe down there. But it could have been a lot worse this hurricane season. Another person posted on Cane Talk named Anna. This season was so slow that it idled Jim to the point where he dabbled in the perilous dark art of hind wish casting in his spectacular speculations of hypothetical tracks with corresponding cats. I guess she saw the picture of the cats in the office here. There's no cats in here tonight, by the way. Historical storms that may have have hit the United States or the islands but didn't, especially through the Greater Antilles. Quite frankly, I don't think I had many cities or islands predicted for the Greater Antilles. My main focus this year was on the Gulf of Mexico, basically outside of Tropical Storm Bill early in the hurricane season. Nothing happened in the Gulf of Mexico. So, but I keep my track record intact. This would make it, I think, 12 out of 14 years where I predicted at least 1 out of 5 locations would be impacted by a named storm. It doesn't have to be a hurricane, just a named storm. So I keep my track record intact with Tropical Storm Bill hitting Matagorda, Texas. There were others in my top 20 that were impacted. I'll get to that later on in the show. But right now we're going to talk mainly about the highlights of the hurricane season. I'm going to say some controversial things here tonight. I've got, like I said, I've got 35 images to show you tonight. Weather Underground had a new TV show, which I kind of enjoy. We had the typical wish casting that was going on, not just on the internet from websites, but we had Twitter accounts, people with Twitter accounts that were going ape shit over every single storm, overhyping everything. We had the National Hurricane Center debate about were they good at forecasting this year because of the models. The models were horrible this year for the most part, especially when it mattered, when Hurricane Joaquin was on the move. I'll get to all the details on that when we get to Joaquin. We had the sinking of the El Faro. We've had forecasters that made blundered forecast calls, especially on intensity, which continues to be a problem. What else came up this year? I had a big argument with a forecaster up in South Carolina. I'll get to that. Big blow up on the Twitter. I think I'm going to get rid of the Hurricane City Facebook account. Now, the Jim Williams account will stay active. That's the one I mainly use. If you're looking me up on Facebook, just type in Hurricane City Tracking or Jim Williams. But the problem with Jim Williams is there's a Jim Williams account and there's a Hurricane City Tracking account. My wife has just entered the room. She needs to grab something, apparently. Watch The Wire, for crying out loud. Oh, God. Watch it.
I see it.
All right. I have a long wire running across here because I was expecting my wireless track mouse, which I can wirelessly control everything on the broadcast, to show up. I ordered it from China, and that was like 2 weeks ago. I'm still waiting for my mouse. So I have a wired mouse here, so it's a long cord that goes in here. So, anyway, I can still control things from here, but it would have been nice to have my wireless mouse. I was kind of looking forward to that. Anyway, basically in a nutshell, this hurricane season, I wanted to mention Phil Klotzbach was very active on Twitter this year. And just to give you a nutshell, I printed this out because I thought it was really valuable. Again, we had 11 named storms. The average is 11.7. That's 94% of climatology, so we almost got right at where we're supposed to be on average, but let's face it, the last 10 years have been crazy with activity, except for last year. And the question is, are we now in a lull? Are we past the active part? And I asked Phil Klotzbach several years ago at one of the hurricane conferences. I said, Phil, I know you talk about cycles, and we have these, he thinks like there's a cycle of 10 years of activity followed by another 10 years of of activity followed by inactivity. And I asked him, do you think this is over, or do you think this is going to last, this active period we're having? And he goes, well, I'm going to give it a few more years, and if it doesn't, and I think I even have the audio clip of that, and he says if it doesn't slow down here, we're going to have to reanalyze our thoughts on global warming's impact and how activity is going to remain active from now on. But now we've gone 2 years with slow activity. So the question is, are we heading down that slow ramp, or are things going to go right back up again next year? That's the big question. But we had 46 named days where there's actually been a named storm out in the Atlantic. The average is 57. So that's... Oh, I wanted to mention one other thing. I got some reading in the off season to do. You know, Bobby was talking about this book I should get on Twitter, Storm Surge by Adam Sobel. I'm going to be reading this in the off season. This is about Hurricane Sandy, how they dealt with the storm surge. It's about 300 pages. I'll be reading this baby. And my old WeatherWise magazines that I haven't had the chance to catch up on. El Nino. How's it going to affect the hurricane season? Well, we know how it affected the hurricane season. A little bit higher numbers than what we expected, but the whole drama and the amount of hurricanes and landfalls and everything, I think it was right on par with what I kind of expected this hurricane season. I expected more activity in the Gulf of Mexico. Didn't pan out, but whatever. Let's go ahead and get to our images tonight. And let's start out with a image of the 2015 Atlantic hurricane season. And here we are looking at the map from the National Hurricane Center of our map of the amount of named storms we had here. Again, 11 named storms. The last one, Kate, is not on this map. The National Hurricane Center has not updated that. That flirted with the Bahamas a little bit and then moved off to the north and dissipated. Oh, one other thing I want to pull up here tonight. Let me pull that up here. This image right here, the Sorry We're Closed, that's pretty cool. Greg from Greg's Weather Center / Hurricaneville posted this on his Facebook page, and this is from Mike's Weather on Facebook, and he posted this image up there tonight. Sorry We're Closed. I think that's pretty funny. That's the image that's up on my left-hand shoulder. And then we have another image, which I'm going to show you when we get to the Joaquin. Well, I'll show it to you now. Hurricane Joaquin in its glory here. Category 4 hurricane moving into the Bahamas. This was the big deal this hurricane season. And we're going to get to the Hurricane Joaquin talk. There's a lot of controversy over Joaquin. But back to the 2015 map here. This map is, you know, not too much different than 1997's map, but we were expecting El Nino this year. A lot of talk coming into the hurricane season. How much of an impact is El Nino going to have this hurricane season? And there's Godzilla blowing all that hot air on the eastern Pacific, blasting all that furnace on the water to make the water temperatures hot in the East Pacific, which causes the trade winds to shift from coming from Africa to coming off the United States coastline and causing wind shear, troughs coming off the United States, zooming out into the Atlantic, causing wind shear. I think most of the year we had like 20 to 30 knots of shear out there in the Atlantic. I mean, there were very far and few between chances for systems to become major or even develop for that matter. So I think the projections for El Nino were right on. Obviously, we're in a strong El Nino. And I went and looked this up the other day. I don't have it graphically, but we're still slightly behind 1997's temperatures, just slightly in the East Pacific. I think in 1997 we were at 2.2 degrees above normal right now, or at least August, September, October. I haven't updated the November yet, gotten the information on November, but for September, October, November, or is it August, September? I think it's August, September, October. We were at 1.7, whereas back in 1997 we were at 2.2 degrees. And it is obviously still increasing, so I think September, October, November, or October, November, December is going to be right on par with 1997 and may actually exceed 1997 as we get into the winter time. We'll have to see about that. But to compare it to 1997 to 2015, here they are side by side. And you'll notice the similarities. Back in 1997, we had the one major hurricane out here. That was Hurricane Fred. And this system, it threatened the northern Antilles but moved out to sea, did not affect anybody. Now you look here to the right, and we had Hurricane Joaquin as the long-tracking major hurricane. So both seasons had one long-tracking major hurricane. And the only difference is in 2015 this year, we had the one major hurricane out in the Atlantic, Danny, which briefly became a hurricane. I'll get to that, a major hurricane. I'll get to that in just a minute. But if you look at the overall tracking map side by side, I mean, they're very similar in the sense that it's a lot of southwest to northeast tracks and a lot of out in the open ocean tracks, and that's typical of an El Nino year. So, you know, back in 97, we had Danny in the Gulf of Mexico, which was a prolific rainmaker. But everything else was out in the ocean, and that's kind of what happened this year. We had the one tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico, Tropical Storm Bill, and everything else was in the Atlantic, with the exception of Erica, which came into the Caribbean here, and the remnants of Danny and Grace. But for the most part, everything was out over the open ocean except for Joaquin here in the Bahamas. That was the big story of the year, but not too dissimilar. I mean, we had, 8 named storms in 97, and this year we had 11. So 3 storms off, but pretty much this season beat 1997 with a similar El Nino. And you could argue that maybe the warmer sea surface temperatures on the entire globe, especially in the Atlantic Basin, and the global warming aspect maybe allowed more storms to develop in 2015 versus 1997 under similar circumstances. That's debatable, but it is open for topic of conversation. By the way, if you'd like to email me tonight, jim@hurricanecity.com, jim@hurricanecity.com. Give me your sentence. How would you describe this hurricane season? jim@hurricanecity.com. All right, here's our first storm of the year. Ana made landfall in May, right before the hurricane season started, and the system came in right around Wilmington, North Myrtle Beach. Ana had 2.5-foot storm tides, 3 to 6 inches of rain, 6.9 inches, storm surge rather. 6.89 inches of rain were reported in Kinston, North Carolina. 10 homes were flooded. 1 person killed. A 25-year-old man drowned. And they had 1 tornado in North Carolina due from that storm before the hurricane season started. Then our next named storm was Bill. Came in early in the season, and I predicted in my opening hurricane season comments that I could see Texas being affected by a named storm early in the hurricane season. That's exactly what happened. As Tropical Storm Bill hit Matagorda, caused a 3.5-foot storm surge, 10 inches of rain, 4 tornadoes, 2 deaths in Oklahoma from all the flooding they had up there. You can see the track, how it went right through Oklahoma as a tropical depression and dumped tremendous amounts of rain up in there. And I think that's why Bill was worse than Ana, in my opinion. Here's the satellite as Bill was moving into Texas. And you can see kind of a lopsided system where all the convection was off to the right of the center. And then as the system moved north toward Oklahoma, all the rain dumped into North Carolina. North Carolina, Oklahoma, and that's what caused all the flooding and the deaths up in that area of Oklahoma. Here is the radar satellite presentation as Bill made landfall. Winds around 45 knots, 50 miles per hour as it moved in, and was projected to hit landfall around in the afternoon time in Matagorda, Texas, and then the rest is history. Here are the rainfall totals as it moved inland in Texas. Not that high. I mean, 3 to 5 inches in Texas. Maybe a few areas had, like I reported earlier, we had maybe 6 inches of rain in Texas, but all the heavy rainfall, the 10-inch plus amounts happened up in Oklahoma. But you can see here, as it moved inland, there was maybe 4 to 6 inches of rain, but it really squeezed out like a sponge when it got up into Oklahoma, and that was the big story for the United States this hurricane season. Now here is Hurricane Danny, and I want to touch on this a little bit because Stacy Stewart, one of the forecasters down at the National Hurricane Center, had this hurricane forecast to become a Category 3 hurricane. And when he did that, I was like, what the hell is he thinking? Because at the time over in here, just east of the northern Leeward Islands, there was like 20 to 30 knots of shear. But what happened with Danny is it did not follow this forecast track. It kind of sunk to the southern end of the cone here, and it found its way in a light environment, shear environment. It kind of drifted out of the forecast track cone and settled in a little bit temporarily in a very favorable environment over very warm sea surface temperatures and became a major hurricane briefly before moving off to the west-northwest and weakening. But this was the original forecast on Danny for a Category 3 hurricane when it was approaching the Leeward Islands, but that never happened. It weakened as it approached the Leeward Islands, but became a major hurricane much sooner than what was anticipated. So Stacy Stewart was kind of right on it, but he was kind of wrong because he was projecting this thing to become a major hurricane over here as opposed to where it became a major hurricane, which was much further to the southeast of this forecast track. And why did we not see any major hurricanes coming into the Caribbean? Look at the wind shear. This is a typical example. I think this was from Danny or Grace. I think it was Grace. Or maybe Erica. I think this was from Tropical Storm Grace. Look at the exposed low-level circulation in this shot. And notice the scissors. I mean, I don't know where the scissors came from, but they chopped the heck out of this system. No, but seriously, there was wind shear probably 30 knots at the time coming through here. And this was the theme for the Atlantic this year. All the wind shear, all these systems, Danny, Erica, Grace, they all tried to make their way toward the Caribbean, and it could have been a devastating hurricane season. And that goes back to what Bobby was saying about what could have been this hurricane season had the wind shear not been that intense. Would we have seen major hurricane after major hurricane coming through the Caribbean Sea? That could have been a real distinct possibility, but it never happened due to the tut that was out there, tropical upper tropospheric trough, wind shear coming out of the west due to El Nino, just a very unfavorable pattern in the Atlantic this year. And then we had Erica, of course, and Erica was projected to be a pretty strong system coming into the Caribbean, but it maintained as a tropical storm, and Erica ended up killing quite a few people in the northern Leeward Islands, in the island of Dominica. And Tropical Storm Erica brought deadly flooding and mudslides to parts of Dominica as it passed to the north on August 27th. And here's a picture of some of the damage there. And the system washed out roadways, collapsed at least one building. 20 people were killed in the flooding on the island of Dominica. Truly a tragic situation early in the hurricane season in August as this system came through. And it goes to show you, it doesn't always have to be a hurricane to be a killer. And this wasn't even a direct hit. Erica, for Dominica, was a tropical storm hit, but it passed north of there. Generally, the winds and the rain and everything are north of the center of circulation. This system became somewhat lopsided when it got to the Caribbean, and all the rain shifted south of the center and just walloped Dominica with torrential flooding and mudslides. A blind elderly man and 2 children were killed in southeastern Dominica, and another man was killed in the country's capital of Roseau as well. But 20 people overall were affected or killed by Tropical Storm Erica as it passed just north of Dominica. That was probably the biggest story of the Atlantic hurricane season when you think about it. I know Joaquin was the big story as far as the hype, the intensity, but when you look at the death toll, no question, Erica was the biggest killer of the hurricane season as far as people killed on land. Now, Joaquin is responsible for 34 deaths, and that's because of the ship that was sunk, that should have never been where it was, that was sunk during Hurricane Joaquin, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But as far as killing people on land, Erica was the killer on land this hurricane season. And then, of course, it was forecast to track into the Bahamas, threaten the United States. Big deal. Could this affect the United States? It was one of those systems that had the potential to affect the United States. But what happened in reality was it did hit Puerto Rico as a tropical storm. It did hit the main Hispaniola. It hit Haiti, Dominican Republic. It briefly touched eastern Cuba, and then it dissipated due to the tremendous amount of wind shear. The system became exposed, and the National Hurricane Center wrote no more advisories on Tropical Storm Erica as it washed out right near Great Anagua, Bahamas, in the Central Bahamas. But that was one that could have potentially been a threat to the United States in a normal season where there was not all that wind shear out there. So again, the pattern was there for big headlines this year, but wind shear kept it in check, courtesy of El Nino. Now this is something I want to talk about. I love talking about the Weather Underground. I love Jeff Masters from the Weather Underground. Here's Mike Bettis and what is his name? Oh gosh, his name always slips my mind. Is it Paul? Not Paul Cosin. Oh gosh, what the heck is his name? Anyway, Sarah Dillingham. We had Dr. Jeff Masters and Brian Norcross there on the set of the Weather Underground. This is a new show the Weather Underground brought out, the Weather Channel brought out this year. And what they do is they come on at like 6 o'clock at night. They go through like 8 o'clock, a 2-hour show, talking about the tropics, what's going on in the United States, any big weather story, they're talking about it. But I really dug this show this year because here they are, all these hurricane experts on the show talking about her. This was right around the time that Erica was out there and Danny, somewhere in the between Danny and Erica is when this screen capture was done. And notice Sarah Dillingham, which I love her. I mean, she's so knowledgeable. A lot of times she puts the guys to shame on this show. I mean, she's really well-spoken. She's very knowledgeable on hurricanes and general weather. And she's the one that sits up there behind the counter and pulls up all the weather data and the latest information that's coming through the wires or whatever on what's happening with the tropical system. But for whatever reason, this picture got a lot of play on social media. The highlight of the picture was there they got the woman in the kitchen while the men are sitting out front doing the forecasting. And I think it was kind of unfortunate because I think they misread this a little bit, the people on social networking. If they would have taken the time to watch this show a little bit and see what's going on, they would have seen she's actually there because she has to pull up all the data and the information on the images you see in the background there. And the guys up front are discussing things in depth. Now, from some feminists may say, well, why isn't she sitting out front with them? I mean, why aren't one of the other guys in the back pulling up the data? I guess you could argue that point, but I think it was really blown out of proportion. And I noticed that after this show, she was out front a little bit more, sitting in the chairs with the guys and everything. But I just thought it was an interesting dynamic. I think it was overdone a little bit about why she was behind the counter as if she was serving drinks for the guys or in the kitchen, so to speak. But I don't think that's what was happening at all. I think she's always plays the role of the person pulling up the images on the screens, a la cooking, if you want to call it that. But I think it was a little bit overdone. But I noticed after this, they brought her back out, and, whatever. Everything's fine. No problem at the Weather Channel. But I really love this show. And I would like to see a little bit more of Dr. Jeff Masters. He seems a little gun-shy in front of the camera. He's not real comfortable in front of the camera, but his insight is really valuable. But I love seeing these guys out there discussing hurricanes. I'm so glad they brought this show up, and I love the show. I mean, it's everything that I want the Weather Channel to be, instead of documentaries and shows. And, I would like to see more of this, and I would like to see more weather. When I turn on the Weather Channel, I want to see what's going on in the country. I want to see where the dramatic weather is in the United States. I also wish they would talk more a little bit about what's going on in the Caribbean and overseas, especially when there's hurricanes on the move. I want guys down in the Caribbean. I want them covering it down there just like they do in the United States. That would be nice. But I really love the show, and I think it's a great idea. And here is Sarah Dillingham and Mike Bettis, and they do a great job co-hosting the show, and I just really love it. I don't watch it every night, but I try to catch it whenever I can before the 8 p.m. shows come on that I like to watch. But just to shout out to the Weather Underground TV. Keep it up. I love it. Keep it going. I hope you keep doing that. Again, that email, jim@hurricanecity.com, if you'd like to chime in on what I'm saying tonight. And again, jim@hurricanecity.com. There are no phones tonight. Now, here is an interesting storm. This was Hurricane Fred. And you know what's interesting this year? We had quite a few people from the message board that had their names used this year. Bill, of course, Tropical Storm Bill. And then we had, I think there's somebody named Eric on the board. I'm not absolutely sure about that. Let's see, we had on a Bill. I have to go through my list of names. Oh gosh, let's go back to the map here, 2015. Yeah, Claudette, Danny, Erica, and then we had Fred. Fred runs HurricaneBlizzardsNor'easters.com, and he's active on Cane Talk, and he's active on social networking. And then we had, no, that's it, 3 names this year. I think there's somebody named Anna, too. Maybe I'm stretching here. I think I need to get off this subject. At least Bill and Fred were represented this year. Okay, good enough. All right, now, where was I? Back to Fred. Fred, love you, but, man, you were tiny this year. Look at the little wind field on that thing. Now, the question is, the National Hurricane Center has not written their final report on Hurricane Fred. Is this a hit or not? Because it went through the Cape Verde Islands and it just kind of navigated between these islands. I think it went just north of the northern Cape Verde Islands, but it kind of went between them for a time there, and it just never really hit anybody. I tried to pay attention on social networking. Is anybody getting hit by this hurricane in the Cape Verde Islands? There were pictures of waves and a little bit of damage here and there, but that could have been caused by tropical storm force winds. So we really don't know if the Cape Verde Islands were directly hit by a hurricane, because the definition of a hit by the National Hurricane Center is the eye passing over land. And I don't think the eye passed over any of these islands in the Cape Verde, so I don't think this is a hit. But it'll be interesting to see what the National Hurricane Center comes up with on Hurricane Fred. Now, after Fred, we had Grace. And Grace was one of these systems that was bothering me because looking at the models, none of the models were really developing Tropical Storm Grace. But I felt like the wind shear prognosis, when it reached the northern Leeward Islands, would allow this thing to potentially strengthen a little bit, and I wasn't ready to write it off. It's the one system that I screwed up this year. Of all the systems I tracked in Hurricane City and I made comments on, Grace was the one, and I'm happy about this because, I mean, it wasn't a big newsmaker and I don't really have any egg on my face. But Tropical Storm Grace, I predicted it would make a comeback near the northern Leeward Islands, and the wind shear just was relentless, and it just tore the crap out of the system. But this guy, Jeff Petrowski, he's no relation, I mean, not Jeff Petrowski, Ed Petrowski, no relation to Jeff Petrowski, the storm chaser. Ed Petrowski is a chief forecaster for the, I believe he's with the ABC affiliate up in the Carolinas, and he covers the South Carolina market primarily. And this guy, and in fact, it was funny because I was working at the time in my construction business, and I was just checking Twitter to see what was happening with Grace. I check it on my iPhone. I have the app for Twitter. And I mentioned him saying, no problem for Grace. It's done. Stick a fork in it. Nothing's going to happen 5 days down the road. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, you can't write this thing completely off because I see that there might be a window of opportunity for this thing to slightly strengthen. But he was telling his audience and everything, nothing to worry about, right? Don't worry about it, which in hindsight he ended up being right. What bothered me, though, is we got into this long argument over whether, what I said was that even though the official forecast calls for this thing to weaken, it could maintain a little bit. And so I said to this guy, Ed Petrowski, I said, this thing could survive and maybe make a run. Once it gets in the Bahamas, this thing could become in a more favorable environment and potentially maybe re-strengthen a little bit. We had a disagreement, which is fine. But then he goes, how can you go against the National Hurricane Center? I go, well, because the National Hurricane Center is not always 100% right on everything. And I go, I'm in the private sector and I have a right to my opinion. I might be wrong on this, but I think this thing might make a comeback. So sure enough, when it got near the Leeward Islands, it flared up. It dumped a lot of rain on the Leeward Islands. It never regenerated into a tropical storm, but I'm to tell you, that thing lit up like almost better than it had even when it was a tropical storm. But the wind shear was relentless, and it never had a chance to develop, to re-intensify. But then he goes, you should never go against the National Hurricane Center. I go, I don't have to follow the National Hurricane Center forecast track and forecast on every single storm. Now, when it matters, they're really good at it. But that doesn't mean I have to go along with every single thing the National Hurricane Center says. And he goes, give me an example where they're wrong. And I go, look at their outlooks. They're not very good. The National Hurricane Center's outlooks, they can go from virtually 10% chance of development from one outlook. 6 hours later, they're at 70% chance of development. I mean, that's not very good outlooks. That's like not recognizing that this system has a good potential to become a tropical storm when 6 hours earlier you said it had virtually no chance. And the National Hurricane Center has had numerous outlooks where they've been bad. And I've questioned how they do that, because you could have one forecaster come on his schedule and look at the wind shear and go, this thing really doesn't have much of a shot. And then the next forecaster comes on and he sees something completely different. But there needs to be a little bit of continuity at the National Hurricane Center when their outlooks come out. And all I said to Ed Petrowski was Their outlooks are not very good. Go look at the archives. They're not real good. And he goes, oh, so you think you could do better than the National Hurricane Center? Here we go. Now we get into the middle school argument. Because I disagree with the National Hurricane Center, therefore I can do better than the National Hurricane Center. I never said I could do better than the National Hurricane Center. In fact, I always endorse the National Hurricane Center. They have the best forecast tracks. They're better than anybody else. But that doesn't mean I don't have a right to deviate a little bit, especially when it comes to the forecast track. But they do a pretty damn good job, which is why I follow the percentage tracks of what city the forecast strike probabilities from the National Hurricane Center to pick my featured cities at Hurricane City because they're really good at it. But occasionally I'll deviate off of that because, you know what, I can see the track, I can see the model trends, I can see what the models are talking about, and I can say, okay, the models are shifting, so I'm going to shift a little bit. I don't have to run with the NHC line like Ed Petrowski does. He has his audience in South Carolina. He has to be careful. So he goes, NHC says this, NHC says that, NHC. But what bothered me about it was when he said to me, are you a degree meteorologist? And I said, oh, here we go. Okay? So because I'm not a degree meteorologist, I have no right to an opinion, and I need to shut up and go away. And this is where the wheels come off. And look, I've been critical of people on Twitter. I've laid it out there. I've said to people on Twitter, you're over-exaggerating the threat. There's a guy out there named Anthony Siciliano. We've had tons of arguments on Twitter. I don't agree with the overhyping of systems. He was all in on the Joaquin hitting the United States. I said, no, it's not going to hit the United States. I'm going with the euro. We got in arguments over that. All I said was, dude, stop comparing it to Hurricane Sandy. Not every system is going to be Hurricane Sandy. We got in this big argument, back and forth on Twitter. But that's what happened with Ed Petrowski. He just labeled me, okay, you're in the private sector, you have Hurricane City. You have no right to an opinion, and I disagree with that. He was arguing, and it got to the point where I just said, you know what, dude, I'm not arguing with you anymore about this. I have a right to my opinion, and that's the way it is.
Why don't you pick on somebody of your own disposition? Oh, please, Mr. Barroom Brawler. Don't hurt me or anything like that.
So you get the picture? You love that Jerry Lewis clip? I love Jerry Lewis. That nutty professor, man, there's just so many good lines in that. But I saved that for the show because, oh, sorry, Mr. Bar Brawler. Like, this is Ed Petrowski. He's the bar brawler. He's the guy, he's looking at me like I'm a bar brawler. You know, I have a right to my opinion. Everybody has a right to their opinion. There's exaggerators out there. I don't do that at Hurricane City, by the way. I'm pretty much stick with the forecast, maybe deviate a little bit. My featured cities are usually right. I might go a little bit to the right or left of the National Hurricane Center, but they are not perfect. Okay? Nobody is perfect as a forecaster. I will admit when I'm wrong, and I'll admit when I'm right. But say that I don't have a right to my opinion because I don't have a degree in meteorology, if I have to hear that one more time, I'm so sick and tired of it. Like, I've been on the internet for 15 years doing this stuff. Look at my track record. I told them, go to Hurricane City, look at the track record, look at my predictions. I'm not wild. Go back on my Twitter feed and pay attention to what I said. I do not exaggerate. I have an opinion that may vary from NHC, but I'm not deviating off of that. I'm sorry. I run Hurricane City in the private sector, but Ed Petrowski, this dude is completely offline, and I'm sorry that this guy feels this way and that he had to go doing that, but I just think he just took the wrong path on that argument, and I'm sorry, man, but the guy's just offline. I'm sorry. But anyway, just taking a grain of salt from Mr. Ed Petrowski on Twitter, because the guy, if you're going to go attack the private sector, dude, you need to get a life, man. Just do your job up there and shut up. Here's Phil Klotzbach, one of his tweets on Fred. which I found interesting. You know, Fred was, it was on again, off again, on again. Fred was one of those systems that you couldn't kill it if you, like, dumped a bucket of cold water on it. It was one of those systems that kept making a comeback in the East Atlantic up near the Azores or whatever. And so Phil Klotzbach, he's really active on Twitter, and he posted this. Fred got knocked down, but it's back up again. It was reclassified as a tropical storm in the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. So I posted this on Twitter. Not interesting. This is interesting. The dog with the glasses on. Fred was not interesting. I'm sorry, once these things are not affecting land and they're out in the middle of the open Atlantic, I don't give a shit. I'm tired of these guys on Twitter all day long. Look at the system out in the middle of the ocean. I really don't care about systems out in the middle of the ocean. I'm a landfall guy. That's what Hurricane City is all about. I love landfalling hurricanes. I like to track them. I like to talk about them. We do shows about them. That's what Hurricane City is all about. I'm not into systems out in the middle of the open ocean, especially when they're in the dying stages and they're not going to make another comeback. Goodbye. Then we got to Joaquin. This is the big story of the 2015 Atlantic hurricane season. Now, this was the advisory from the National Hurricane Center from September 28th. TD number 11. This is when all the hype started on the social networking. National Hurricane Center made the right forecast here because some of the models were taking it out to sea. Here you see the red best performing model on the maps at Hurricane City. That was the GFS Ensemble models, had it going into North Carolina. In fact, the GFS models continued to make the left-hand turn into North Carolina. But the Euro was saying, I think the Euro had like one or two runs where it had it going into the United States. This was in the early portions of Hurricane Joaquin. But once the European model got its act together, it nailed the track of Hurricane Joaquin. And again, I've done some research on that Euro model. What the Euro model does is it weeds out the garbage early on, and then after about 2 days, once you have a named storm out there, after about 2 days, the European model will absolutely annihilate the American models. Because what they do is that model takes all the bad data that it's been wrong about in the first 2 days, and it tosses it out. The American models, on the other hand, they keep adding more data. And that's the difference between the two models. The American models, they keep adding and adding and adding, and then they have a million ensemble models and all the... It's too much. And then I went and looked up the money that is spent on the European model versus the GFS and the American models. And the European model is a group of 50, I think it's 52 nations. I may be wrong, maybe it's 25. I don't have the number. I'm speaking off the top of my head here. But these group of countries fund this model. And I think it's like $150 million that's put into this model, the European. And you say, well, how come the United States doesn't put that money into their models? Well, they do actually. But the problem is that money is dispersed amongst several different models. You got 30 million going to the GFS. You got 25 million going to the GFDL and the 25 to the HWRF. And you got this HFIP model that's experimental that you got to put money into. So, and then you got the NABGEM. So you got all these models that are sucking money from the U.S. budget, Department of Commerce budget for modeling, NOAA's budget for modeling. And there you go. You have the money spread out evenly over all these models. And so, meanwhile, the European model, they're putting all that money into one model, and they're making it really good. And I think what the United States needs to do is maybe get rid of a couple of these models that are just not performing very well. Now, the Navy model, you're not going to get rid of it because it's the Navy and they're proud of it and they want to keep it and blah, 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 blah. The GFDL model is just god-awful and they need to get rid of that piece of shit. It's a bad model. H-Wharf is much better. It's an improved version of the GFDL model, but I'm still not that impressed with the H-Wharf. I mean, it still has its flaws. I'll get to the models and what they thought this thing was going to do in just a minute. But the moral of the story is there's just as much money being put into the American models as the European model. But the problem is Europeans put the money into the European model. The Americans put the money into 4 or 5 different models. And that's where the problem lies. They need to cut out a lot of the data that goes into the models. Now, the recon data is great. The input from the high-altitude aircraft and the recon is excellent. That helps with the models. But all the other model data that they're putting into this, weed it out. Get rid of it. Do something with it. Increase the resolution. Whatever you have to do on the GFS to improve it, to make it compete with the European model, they need to do that. Maybe there's some things in the works that I'm unaware of. But that's the moral of the story is we put as much money into it, but it's too spread out. Now, here is the water vapor image shot that I took right when Hurricane Joaquin was in the Bahamas. And I had a lot of people here in South Florida and, all over the United States emailing me, Jim, are you sure this thing's not coming to the United States? And I kept showing this image, and in fact, I used it on my Tropical Update video for Joaquin. And I said, this is a wall. This is a wall. Pretend it's a brick wall, and it's slowly inching towards Hurricane Joaquin. There is no way that hurricane is going to penetrate that brick wall that's moving through Florida. So Florida, you're not going to get hit by this. None of the Hurricane Center forecast models, nor any of the model data supported Hurricane Joaquin coming into the state of Florida. Now, there were models, GFS ensembles, GFDL, I think even the H-Wharf on a few runs, insisted that this could come in as far south as South Carolina. The models were shifting down there, thinking that the trough was going to swing through and do a sandy track, slinging it back toward the United States. Whereas the European model, out to sea, I kept saying, pay attention to the euro until the euro starts shifting. I'm not buying this. That image there tells a strong story. It's not coming, folks. Look at the wall in Florida. Now, if that was a stalled out front or it was backing up, then this would be a hurricane for Florida. But the people that were freaking out over the Florida hit were just completely ridiculous. They weren't paying attention to the media, the models, myself, anybody that was talking out there. It was not coming to Florida. Now, here is the forecast that got everybody whipped up into a frenzy when the National Hurricane Center had this coming into North Carolina, Virginia Beach. We were doing the hurricane warning shows that night, Bill and I, and we had plans. If this track was to verify in 24 hours from this forecast track date, which was on 5 p.m. Wednesday, September 30th, if this track was going to remain that way the following day, which would have been the 31st, then I would have been getting in my truck and heading up to Virginia Beach to intercept this hurricane with Bill Phillips. But I said on the show that night, the European model, I'm sorry, but that European model, see the blue track right here? European model, what would be the European model, that's where it ended up going. And here are the American models, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia Beach. The cone was bending to the left. The National Hurricane Center was pulling the hair out of their head. Oh my God, what are we going to do? All the American models are swinging it into the U.S. and the European is taking it out to sea. What are we going to do? Do what Jim Williams would have done. Follow the Euro model. Until the Euro proves you wrong, you got to go with it. Not that the Euro is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying, right now, they got to fix things. Because the European model is kicking the American model's asses with hurricanes. All right, now, just to prove that to you, here's the GFS. This is the 06Z model from Tropical Tidbits. Levi Cowan does a great job at that website, by the way, putting up all those model tracks from the European model, the GFS. He's got the ensembles on his site. Canadian, blah, blah. Even the Canadian is a piece of shit. But the GFS Joaquin forecast here for the GFS. I mean, come on. Look at that track. I mean, anybody would shit their pants looking at that. That had this thing as a 105-mile-an-hour hurricane heading into the Outer Banks of North Carolina. 974 millibars. Didn't happen. Here's the H-Wharf. This is the 12Z model on September 29th. Has it as a 105-mile-an-hour hurricane going into the Delmarva Peninsula, into the Chesapeake Bay. Would have been a direct hit on Bill's location. Bill was all whipped up into a frenzy. Oh, man, he was so pissed off over this hurricane. Because he was telling all his friends and neighbors and family, there's a good chance this thing's going to come here. This thing could be a major disaster for the area, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he also mentioned the fact that Jim thinks the Euro is going to take it out. I mean, the Euro is going to take this thing out to sea. Not that the Euro has hooks or anything and it can make something go that way, but that the European was forecasting this system to go out to sea. And Bill and I talked about it on the phone extensively, even outside the hurricane warning show we did that night, that this thing could potentially go out to sea, and I'm not going up there until I know this thing is turning. But meanwhile, he had his family all whipped up into a frenzy, and it was just, the models, I'm telling you, you can't always bite on these models. You got to give them a little bit of time to weed out. And so far, the GFS, this is the H-Wharf, and here is the good old GFDL. GFDL 06Z on September 30th has it as a 120-mile-an-hour hurricane off the Delmarva Peninsula, or going into Chesapeake Bay, 942 millibars. That's your GFDL model, okay? GFDL model sucks. It over-forecasts everything. The tracks they blow on the GFDL model, okay? It's not a good model. It's time to retire this thing. It's bad, okay? 3 American models had this thing either hitting or within the vicinity of the United States when the European model had that thing going out to sea. So naturally, you ask yourself, why do we continue to fall in love with these American models, especially the long-range models that go out 10 to 14 days, where the resolution is half of what it is when it's close, when it's, within a week's time frame? Ugh. I don't know. But the moral of the story is with these models, the GFS, the H-Wharf, the GFDL, the Canadian, the NAVGEM, really did shitty on Hurricane Joaquin. It made a lot of people nervous. A lot of people had to close businesses down, change their travel plans, you name it. So, what, $1 million a mile? Now, there was never a point where there was evacuations, I do not believe. But the notion that that hurricane was going to hit the mid-Atlantic coast as a major hurricane, not to mention the stuff that was on Twitter and Facebook, was appalling to me. The overhype of this system for the United States, based on Sandy, which was a very rare track, and chances of it repeating, within a few years were slim. I thought there was a possibility it could happen, but until that European model shifted, I wasn't buying it. I'm not going to be burned twice. I got burnt by the GFS in Sandy in 2012, and I said, nope, this year I'm going with the Euro because it's got a proven track record, and the Euro stood out. But I'm going to tell you, out of all of these group of models, the Canadian model sucks and the NAVGEM sucks. Anybody that sits there and quotes these 2 models on social networking needs to have their fingers chopped off. They're bad models. Now, did the captain of the El Faro pay attention to the NAVGEM and the Canadian model? Makes you wonder. 34 souls on that ship dead. They found 1 body. The ship left Jacksonville They knew this thing was a hurricane, and they core punched it. I blame the captain. Now, here's the thing. The captain was in contact with the headquarters that owns the company that owns this ship. The company had an obligation to tell that captain, do not sail that ship into the hurricane. Now, it's going to be interesting when this goes to court because there's going to be tapes, I'm sure, communication between the parent company and the captain. It's going to be very interesting to see if the captain disobeyed orders, or did the captain and the parent company decide, okay, we'll leave it up to your discretion. You go and do what you think is right, captain. And if that's the case, there's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be a lot of rich families for the deceased that were on this ship. If the captain was wrong and the parent company can prove that they told the captain not to sail into that storm, then I don't know. That's going to be a hard one to sue over because they can't control the captain. Once he's on that ship, they can tell him what to do, but that doesn't mean he's going to do it. Now, a lot of cargo was lost. They found the remains of that ship. Whether they're going to find the remains of all these people missing is probably doubtful. But just a tragedy, man. I mean, 34 people dead. You got 20 killed from flooding in the island of Dominica from Tropical Storm Erica, and 34 killed from Joaquin. Now, the other tragedy of Hurricane Joaquin was when it was in this position down in the Bahamas and after it was pulling away, Wayne Neely, who I have a great deal of respect for, he's written numerous books on hurricanes about the Bahamas. I was at his Facebook page, and he pronounced that there's a possibility that he hated to admit the fact that could be as many as 7 people killed in Long Island, Bahamas. And I thought, oh my God, that's tragic. On top of the people that were already killed on that ship, now we have 7 people dead due to storm surge in the Central Bahamas. So I tweeted that out there. We may have 7 people dead in the Bahamas. Other people were tweeting it out. It becomes somewhat viral. And I was watching closely the networks to see if they were going to mention people killed in the Bahamas, if it was going to go that far. But the networks never bid on it. They like to get things confirmed or have a good idea whether that's real before they actually come out and make a pronouncement to the national media that, yes, there's a chance 7 people were killed in the Bahamas. Because as far as I've been tracking hurricanes, as long as I've been alive tracking hurricanes, I've never seen a huge death toll in the Bahamas. And this would have been really dramatic, considering that you usually see low death tolls in the Bahamas. And I was hoping this was wrong, and sure enough, it ended up being wrong. What happened was the people were evacuated, or they left the area, and then when rescuers got there, they found an empty house with the windows blown out and the doors all blown in, and they figured the people got washed out to sea, and it was a little bit premature before they could confirm that the people were actually relocated. So, good news out of the Bahamas. Nobody died on land as a result of this hurricane. There was one guy that had a heart attack that was kind of unrelated to it, but the Bahamas nevertheless got their ass kicked. I mean, they got hit really hard by Hurricane Joaquin. In fact, Ackland Island, they had a 4 to 5 foot storm surge, while Joaquin was just northeast of the island. 7 or 8 homes were totally destroyed, with reports of many utility poles down. There was significant flooding in Delectable Bay, Snug Corner, and the north part of Mason's Bay. 5 houses were destroyed in Mason's Bay and 4 in Snug Corner. Power outages, no injuries were reported. All residents were accounted for. On Long Island, where the reports of 7 people dead came out, that there was power outages and down power lines, flooding of private freshwater wells, structural damages to homes, extreme flooding of approximately 4 feet of water in the northern parts of the island. The police station was evacuated because of flooding. On Little San Salvador Island, which I think may have been the worst hit area, as the eye came right over that island, Reports of extensive damage, flooding throughout the island, downed power lines, poles, roads impassable. 130 people reported to shelters, one of which had its roof blown off during the height of the storm, resulted in the relocation of people within the same facility. The island of Great Exuma, power lines down, extreme flooding. Overall, in the Bahamas, they were impacted by an 18-foot storm surge. Now, that doesn't mean that there was 18 feet of water on land, but there were some areas that had 5 to 6 to 7 feet of water. 836 homes were destroyed in the Bahamas. So, basically, a very, very intense hurricane for the Bahamas. But unlike a hurricane that hits the mainland United States with that sort of intensity, you have a lot less populated areas in these islands. The homes are more scattered on the island. They're very well-built homes, by the way. CBS built, strong roofs. People take them, they have shutters on their homes. They take these things very seriously when the hurricane is approaching. Compared to the United States, when a hurricane is approaching, you have some people that don't shutter their homes, some that do. You have a lot of flying debris. You have a lot more homes that can be damaged by the flying debris. So when a hurricane like this hits the U.S., there's quite a bit of damage and, unfortunately, fatalities. Whereas when it's the Bahamas, they're a little bit more prepared in the sense that they've been through the drill so many times. A whole host of major hurricanes have hit the Bahamas. Well-built homes. So, as long as they get to shelters and they get to high ground, generally the Bahamas are okay. And this is why it shocked me when I heard about 7 deaths in the Bahamas. And I know Wayne Neely, next time around, that there's a major hurricane, he's going to hold off on tweeting about something like that until there's more confirmation, because you could get a lot of people with sweaty palms over a situation like that. All right, so then the forecast by the National Hurricane Center was for Hurricane Joaquin to pass west of Bermuda. Now again, social networking went crazy. The National Hurricane Center doesn't know what they're talking about. Blah, 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 blah. It's going to go west of Bermuda. It's going to go over Bermuda. It's going to go east of Bermuda. The National Hurricane Center had it right. It's going to go just west of Bermuda. Here's a shot from the HurTrack program showing the hurricane force wind field, the hurricane force gust of wind generally within that aqua circle, with the sustained hurricane force winds inside the red circle, clearly went west of the island, and there were no hurricane force winds in Bermuda except for the higher elevations. Here is the radar shot from that. You can see the core of the hurricane is clearly outside of the inner ring of the island of Bermuda. They had some tropical storm force winds on the island, minor damage, but overall it's a brush for Bermuda from Hurricane Joaquin, as it was weakening, by the way. But this was not a direct hit by Hurricane Joaquin on Bermuda. The National Hurricane Center nailed the track on Bermuda, and the people on social networking just need to take a chill pill and stop trying to throw NHC under the bus at every opportunity. I mean, when I disagreed with NHC, I didn't say they didn't know what they were talking about in any of my tweets. My argument was with Ed Petrowski, back and forth between him and I on Twitter. It was not broadcast to the general public. I wanted to show this website. This is the Hurricane Hunters Noaa website, and notice they have Tropical Atlantic, Chris Hollis's website, and Hurricane City, both listed on links from the Noaa Hurricane Hunters. We greatly appreciate the links that the Hurricane Hunters, Noaa's Hurricane Hunter website produces, the links showing Hurricane City and Tropical Atlantic, and it shows the respect they have for Chris Hollis, because he's been to their base and looked at their planes, and they know what he does with the Hurricane Hunter reports on the Google Earth and at Hurricane City and Tropical Atlantic. He provides all the vortex messages and the radar shots. In fact, here's a radar shot of Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific, and this is what we really love this year, that the Hurricane Hunters were able to provide, is radar shots, especially in the Bahamas, where there's no radar available on the internet, which drives me crazy year after year after year. But finally, we're able to see the radars from the Hurricane Hunters in the Bahamas and everywhere else that the radar doesn't reach. And this is just a great process. And Chris has found a way to developed the maps at Hurricane City where the radar is integrated into the maps, so we can see the latest radars from the hurricane hunters as they're flying out there. One more image back to Joaquin. This was from the HurTrack program, which, by the way, that link is on the front page of Hurricane City if you'd like to purchase the program. It's a great program. It's probably the most extensive program you can buy for hurricane tracking with data such as what you're looking at here with the bar graphs. Now, this is the wind field, the peak winds as it, and I highlighted the Bahama Islands in here. When it was near Acklands, it had winds of around 130 miles per hour. And when it hit Long Island, Bahamas, same thing, around 130. San Salvador, Bahama Islands, 130 miles per hour. Then it dropped off a little bit as it turned around and started heading the different direction, heading north again. And then it peaked. And I remember in one of my update videos, and this was at the update video I did for when Joaquin was hitting the Bahamas, I mentioned that this thing could potentially get up to Category 5 if it finds itself in the right environment. Sure enough, it got really close. It got up to about 150 miles an hour before it started to weaken as it pulled away from the Bahamas. But as it pulled away from the Bahamas, it peaked here in intensity. But interestingly, the pressure never peaked. It never lowered. This was as the pressure was rising that these winds were established out here based on recon fixes. So, again, great job by the recon, the hurricane hunters, to find this thing almost near Category 5 status as it pulled away from the Bahamas. But, boy, the Bahamas had to take a lick down there. I mean, it had to be really, really intense during the height of that hurricane in San Salvador, Acklands, and Long Island. Now, this is something that's very refreshing to me on the internet. Here's a post on Facebook by John Bevan, who everybody knows as Jack Bevan, one of the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center. He wrote an advisory on Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific. Here's what he said, a story about fallibility. 2 days ago, I was making a forecast on a disorganized tropical storm in the Pacific southeast of Acapulco, Mexico. My forecast was for the winds to increase to about 100 miles per hour before it made landfall in Mexico. Last night, Tropical Storm Patricia rapidly intensified into the strongest eastern Pacific hurricane on record with winds of over 200 miles per hour, near 200 miles per hour. My forecast for intensity was off by about 100 miles per hour. I don't know if this is the largest forecast error I've ever made, but it certainly ranks right up there. So Jack Bevan came out and admitted he made a mistake on an intensity forecast. I love this guy. I mean, I wish everybody was like this on the internet. When they blow a forecast, they come out and they go, you know what, I screwed up. And a good scientist will admit a mistake and then fix it. And that's what I love about Jack Bevan, and that's why he's still at the National Hurricane Center. He's one of the best forecasters, if not the best forecaster they have. And it's hard, you know, the intensity forecast have a lot of work to do on intensity. National Hurricane Center has been working on this problem. The equipment hasn't caught up to the intensity yet. We have good equipment that can, and model data that can predict where a storm is going to go 5, 7, 10 days out. But when it comes to intensity, the models are just lacking on this. And the National Hurricane Center does the best they can under difficult circumstances with intensity forecast. But the moral of the story is that if they nail the track and people know they're going to get a significant hurricane, I don't think it really matters whether it's 150 or 200 mile an hour winds that are coming there. I mean, people know the thing is coming and they do a great job on their forecast tracks. So if there's anything I would rather them be wrong on, it would be intensity rather than track, because track is so much more important than intensity. But let's hope they can get the track, the forecast, intensity forecast, much more improved for 2016, because we still have a long way to go on intensity. But kudos to Jack Bevan for coming out and at least admitting, you know what, I did bad on this and I need to improve on it. And other forecasters out there, especially in the private sector, they never admit when they're wrong, and it just drives me crazy. They just move right on to the next storm, and they never go, you know what, I screwed up on that. So I think more forecasters need to own up to their errors. I know that's a hard thing to do because when you want people to follow you and respect you, you have to admit when you're wrong. But unfortunately, too many people think that by just making it look like you're right all the time, that's the way to get people following you. Admit when you're wrong. There are people, and they know who they are. There's several big-name forecasters out there that are tweeting their asses off 24 hours a day, and they know who they are, and they don't come out and admit when they're wrong about it. Come out and admit when you're wrong, and you'll get more respect that way, in my opinion. And anyway, the hurricane hunters, again, they were out there flying quite a few storms this year, gathering data. But here's that radar from the Bahamas. This was Tropical Storm Kate. Late in the hurricane season, this was our last named storm. Notice the banding features. It was a lopsided system. All the convection was northwest of the center of circulation. Lesser convection to the east, kind of a lopsided system. I think it was partially exposed at this point. But this is stuff that this is data we just simply have not gotten in years past. Because the hurricane hunters have made the radars available on the internet, and people like Chris Hollis is able to extract that data and put it on Hurricane City and Tropical Atlantic. It's just a blessing that they've started making that data available and people are able to put it on the internet. So now we can see the bare areas where there is no radar, and we can get a better idea of the structure of these tropical systems when they're out of radar range. So great job by the hurricane hunters this year. Just a fantastic job. All right, here is the map showing my predictions for the 2015 hurricane season. And you can see my ticking time bomb was South Florida. My number one pick was for the southwest Florida coastline. Now, I really felt like in years past that based on past El Nino seasons and slow hurricane seasons, southwest Florida seems to get hit a lot, especially the Florida Keys. So I had Key West number 3, and I had the Sarasota area, the Naples, Port Charlotte area is number 1. My number 2 area was Panama City. Interestingly, there were model projections and a invest that was going to become a tropical storm by all model projections and head towards Panama City during the hurricane season. It just never quite panned out, but that was a possibility in the middle of the hurricane season that Panama City was going to be impacted. That was my number 2 area. My number 4 area was Morgan City, Louisiana. And my number 5 area was Matagorda, Texas, which was hit by Tropical Storm Bill. So again, 1 out of my top 5 got impacted for 12 out of 13 years. And if you go to my predictions page, let's pull that up. Now, here you can see the yellow highlighted areas are areas that were actually impacted in my top 20. Port O'Connor to Matagorda, my number 5. Bermuda was in my top 20. They were brushed by Hurricane Joaquin. San Salvador, Bahamas was in my top 20. They were hit by Hurricane Joaquin. So 3 of my top 20 areas were impacted this hurricane season. So anyway, in a nutshell, that was the hurricane season we had this year. And so now you ask, what is in store for next hurricane season? Bill asked me an interesting question. By the way, let me see if I have any late news on Bill here, because he was getting out of the hospital as we speak. He's a little bit sore, but he's otherwise okay, and he's, I guess he might be home by now, I'm not sure, but Bill was hit by a car earlier tonight. Bill helps me with Hurricane City, the shows, and he's disabled. He has one of those electric chairs, and he tells me about the traffic and how close they come to hitting him all the time. Well, tonight it happened. As he was heading home to get ready to be on the show tonight, he was hit by a car. The chair got mangled. They took him to the hospital. He's okay. He's been released. He's a little bit sore. Thank God. Probably the chair is going to have to be replaced, but glad to hear Bill is okay tonight. But Bill mentioned to me earlier, we talked earlier today, and he was talking about not today, over the weekend we talked, and he asked me, well, Jim, what happened after the 1997 hurricane season, the last strong El Nino? We ended up with like 14 named storms the following year, and we had quite a few hits. I think Hurricane 98, we had Hurricane George, which I intercepted in Mississippi, by the way. And if that happened again, I would be live on the internet covering that hurricane. But I covered a Hurricane George. I was in Pascagoula, Mississippi for that storm with Jeff Gammons. And we were slightly inland in a hotel, and then we went and did a lot of aftermath stuff, and the National Guard was giving us all kinds of crap. But anyway, that season was very active, and we could potentially have another active season going into 2016. So what I'm going to leave you with here tonight is, don't let this season fool you because you got off the hook this year. Next season could be a completely different ball game. And like Bobby said, with the track trending off the African coast, we had a lot of Cape Verde systems coming across this year. And had they been in a favorable environment, it might have been a completely different hurricane season. Next year, El Nino lets up. All indications are El Nino may let up by the time the hurricane season comes around next year. So we may be in more neutral hurricane season conditions, or maybe more active, maybe La Nina a little bit. We'll see where that goes. But next year it could be very active and it could be very dangerous, so don't let your guard down. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Thank you for watching. Glad Bill is okay. I want to thank all the viewers and the people that go to Hurricane City, people that continue to re-up their subscriptions, which is basically a donation. $20 annually. Click one of the donate buttons at Hurricane City. It keeps all this going. I'm not one of these people who likes to panhandle too much. We don't have advertisers. We don't try to abuse social media to bring money in. I don't have a subscription service where I'm paying you to watch my videos. Basically, it's an open source Hurricane City. So if you want to help out, hit the subscribe button, which basically is a donation. And what you get for the $20 annually, which is a small amount of money, you get my emails whenever we're going to go live. During the hurricane season, you get my inner thoughts emailed to you. You'll get notified of the shows. You get access to the archive page, all the old archives from going back 15, 20 years. You can watch all the old hurricanes hit, hurricane warning shows. And, of course, you get all the data at Hurricane City, all the best performing models. We're going to be adding the Euro next year. It's going to be really, really cool next year, all the stuff that's at Hurricane City. But that hurricane season like this, there hasn't been that much interest. 10 years in the doldrums. Next year, maybe that'll turn around. Who knows? Anyway, that's it for tonight. Good night, everybody.